Well, Jim, welcome to the program. I really found your book nourishing and helpful in a lot of ways. There were a number of topics that you hit on that are really, close to my heart in terms of God as a creator. We're made in His image. Therefore, when we create, there is something that is really close to the heart of God in that process. So I found the book nourishing in that regard, giving me a lot of biblical and intellectual underpinning for that notion. But I want to start with this question, sort of the big why question. Why did you write this book? Why do you think the church and the world need this book now?
Well, the providential timing was an invitation in early 2019 to give a speech, and it was coming from someone who's a Christian, but also um, she's she's involved in the one of my client organizations as the Texas state leader, and she happens to be a member and involved very much in First Baptist of Dallas. So she invited me. She didn't know much about patents and invention and why in the world Phyllis Schlafly or anybody else would care a whole lot about patents in the conservative movement. But it that was the invitation. I gave the speech. I said patent several times, and nobody's eyes glazed over, and nobody fell asleep. And so I kind of reported back how things went well when I got back to Washington. And a good friend of mine suggested, "Why don't you turn the speech text into a book?" And I really have tried to apply biblical principles, my Christian faith, Judeo-Christian perspective and worldview to all that I do in legislative work and all of that over the years. And this was the first time I'd kind of sat down and taken my Bible and thought through patents and invention. So that was it opened a door. That speech opened a door to something that I had not really gone in great depth in. And then when my friend suggested the book, I was thinking this would give me great opportunity to get more in depth, because I just scratched the surface really for the speech preparation. So the reason the world needs it as providentially is that we are taking for granted these qualities of creativity and ownership. There's great creativity going on in the world right now, and it's including in the United States and especially in the United States. But we have severed the relationship of creativity and ownership. And that's what God has established in his as part of common grace, that everybody, Christian or not, enjoys his grace, of the rain falling on the righteous and the unrighteous alike, those common benefits and blessings. But we have severed the relationship of creativity and ownership. So
You
reestablish.
know, Jim, sometimes I will talk, especially to maybe younger Christians, or and some now it's often older Christians that are come out of the hippie movement of the 60s and 70s, who decry this notion of ownership. That they look at passages in Scripture like Acts chapter 2, where the early church shared all of their possessions in common, and they think that ownership, personal property, private property ownership, is a function of materialism and selfishness and greed. And they seem to forget that two of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not covet and thou shalt not steal, presupposes the notion of ownership, that personal ownership is a core biblical idea, especially a biblical ethic, a way that we should behave in the world. Can you say more about that? First of all, do I have that right? Do you agree with that? And can you say a little more about it?
I do agree with that. That is completely accurate. God gave us our creativity. That's one of his communicable attributes that he generously shares with human beings, and human beings alone among all of creation. But so does he benefit us in the same way with another communicable attribute, which you named ownership. Ownership is the right to do with what you own and enjoy the fruits of your labor. And you look at things like the frequently recurring uh, potter and the clay uh, metaphor in the Bible. And the potter has the right to decide what to make, how to make it, whether to throw it away or whether to start over and recast it instead of as a cup, as a saucer. Um, the other really more compelling even biblical metaphor is, which recurs as well, is the vine and the fig tree. This is most directly Micah 4:4, but it's elsewhere in Scripture. But it's the picture, the image of the guy who works and keeps his garden and has a vine and a fig tree, and at the end of the workday, he is resting underneath the shade of that tree and enjoying the fruits, literally, of those vine and fig tree fruits of his labor. And that phrase actually is in Scripture. It's not derived by John Locke. John Locke is quoting Scripture basically. Uh, this is the ownership is critically important. God owns everything he makes, and he claims that. And we are owned by God, whether we're Christians or not. He is our maker, and he owns us. And he allows us, as human beings, his image bearers, to be able to exercise ownership. Now, it's not to become greedy. It's not to become materialistic, that's your idol, but it is to say that you, if when you have the ability to enjoy the fruits of your labor, whether that's a paycheck or whether that's a royalty on your patent for licensing it to someone, then that gives you the agency to be able to go forth and make more, to magnify, to multiply the benefits that come from that initial invention. Applying that invention, turning it into a marketable, commercializable product that benefits many more people, you're doing more good in the world than just having a one-off invention.
Now, Jim, these ideas sound a little bit abstract to maybe to a lot of people, but a couple of things that I really learned from reading your book. Number one is they have really real practical applications in the real world. You've got story after story after story of inventor who made things, created things that radically changed our lives. Everything from information technology, air conditioning, going all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. And were it not for so I learned that there are practical applications. The second thing I learned was that patent protection, intellectual property protection, has been built into the American system of law almost from the very beginning. Now, we don't have the time today to recount the complete history of patent law and intellectual property protection in this country, um, but can you confirm and maybe say a little bit about how important intellectual property protection was even from the very beginning of the republic?
Yes. In fact, it was uh, Massachusetts that had the first patent law in the American colonies. It wasn't quite what ours is today, but then South Carolina was the first state to adopt a patent law, which was more much closer to the one that ended up in the Constitution as Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. The American patent system.
Jim, let me pause you right there because you said something that I want to make sure I understand. Um, Patent protection, intellectual property protection is wasn't added on later. It's a part of the Constitution. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. That's the only place in the Constitution itself, preceding by years the a couple of years um, the Bill of Rights, where all the other times the word right appears in the Constitution. It's only, for most part, it's added on in the Bill of Rights, but in the Constitution itself, Article 1, the legislative branch, Congress has is authorized to be able to make uh, laws that protect exclusive ownership for a limited time. So that gets you the patent bargain. And this is something that James Madison and the South Carolina delegate Charles Pinckney worked together and added. And this was near the end of the convention, the Constitutional Convention, and it was added without any kind of controversy. Others understood the importance of having that exclusive right to be able to enjoy the fruits of your creative and inventive labor, and that's both copyrights and patents.
So, Jim, these ideas also have real implications today. I mean, one of the reasons that America is one of the most prosperous nations in the world is because of these intellectual property protections that allow colleges and universities and private entrepreneurs to make an investment, sometimes really significant investment in research and development and entrepreneurship and inventive arts, shall we say, because they know that if they discover something or invent something, that all that work will not be in vain, that it won't be immediately stolen by others, that there will, at least for a period of time, be some protection. And that has made America one of the most creative and innovative countries, not only in the world today, but really in the history of the planet. However,
Absolutely.
we're seeing some challenges to that. We're seeing challenges in China. We're seeing challenges in other parts of the world. So, is that one of the reasons why you wanted to sort of lay out this strong historical and intellectual underpinning so people can understand why it is so important that we preserve intellectual property rights and privileges?
Yes, exactly. Because as it was finally put into law in 1836, the third iteration of a patent law from 1790 to 1836, we had two bills that were the precursors, but the 1836 model still underpins our patent system to a large extent, but it's been weakened in critically important ways. The thing about our system is it democratized the ability to obtain a patent. Doesn't matter your status in society, your right to vote or not, i.e., a woman before uh, the the law was changed, giving women the right to vote. I mean, all those things are important. That the democratization of patents to incentivize getting a deed around property that did not exist before you created it. And if you created it, you had an idea and you turned that idea into something that's practical and works and is new, then all that the government is doing, the government's not giving you rights, the government is securing rights that you inherently have. So back to ownership. And you're right. The reason it's important to have that patent reliable status of a patent with regard to ownership is that's the basis most of the time to get investors to be able to risk their money on you, on your invention. Otherwise, they're not going to. And that's one of the things we've seen in recent years is sophisticated invention is the amount of private investment going into it is diminished because we've weakened our patent system. We're squandering the system the founding fathers designed based on which it represents the crux of the biblical creativity ownership equals human flourishing model. So we're squandering something that moved us in within a century from a small agrarian economy to the world's innovation powerhouse with iconic inventors that were household hero names.
Yeah, Jim, I want to fast forward because we don't have an unlimited amount of time, and there's just so much in your book that we can't cover. But I wanted to ask you about some specific problems, I guess you could say, of the modern era of the 21st century, and just get your reaction to that. I think, especially from where I sit here at Ministry Watch, we cover mostly the ministry world, and yet it's been surprising to me how often and how regularly intellectual property issues come into play. So let me give you one example. In the Bible translation world, there's been a lot of talk about open sourcing. That Bible translation organizations will own the copyright to individual translations of the Bible, and they use that copyright ownership to generate revenue, and which under normal circumstances I would say is a good thing. I mean, if I wrote a book, I don't want people just to be able to print copies of my book and sell it. I want to reserve that right for myself. But when it
Amen
comes
to
to
that.
when it comes to the yeah, now that you've read the book, the but when it comes to the Bible, it does create some special problems, and there have been advocates within the Bible translation world for open sourcing, and that is pitted Bible translation organization against the Bible translation organization, the ones that favor open sourcing versus those that own the copyrights. Do you have any thoughts about that controversy and how that might be resolved?
It's I'd say that I would come down in favor of the right of those who hold to the importance of the copyright because they're the ones who put in the sweat equity, the money, and the time and effort, and hired people to translate and all those sorts of aspects to produce that version of the Bible in a different new version in a different language, and or let's say. Um, it took money, it took time. People could not do that for free on a systematic basis and and be effective. You have to have the ability to profit. Profit is merely another word for abundance. There's more than you actually, need yourself to survive. It's something that takes you beyond that so that you can engage with others. And in this situation, it would be hiring somebody to publish not only a handful, but a bunch of copies of that scripture. Um,
Right.
and then to ship those to wherever across the world to distribute them. This none of this is free. Um, that's on the other hand, there is of course with exclusive ownership, which copyright and patent does give at least for a period of time. There's the ability to forego your right. You're not holding it too tightly. Um, it's not something that you're going to be you're going to sometimes want to share something. For instance, with the 3-point cross your body seat belt in cars. Uh, Volkswagen came up with that design and they patented it, but then they immediately distributed, forewent the collection of royalties or requiring licenses to use it. They wanted the whole industry to be able to convert to that safer design of a
Because it would, I mean, they were able to immediately determine that it actually saved lives, and they did not want to inhibit the adoption of that 3-point harness. So that makes
exactly.
it. So what I'm hearing, Jim, is your position would be don't erode copyright law, but encourage generosity among the copyright holders, especially those that are in the Bible translation space. Is that a fair
Yes,
assessment?
exactly, exactly.
Well, let me hit you with another issue, and that is artificial intelligence. There's been a large Chat GPT and other large language models have to be trained by using material that's sort of on the internet. In other words, when I ask the question, who is James R. Edwards Jr. into Chat GPT or Grok, it's going to answer that question based on going out onto the internet and finding information about James R. Edwards Jr. Some of that material might be copyrighted. And there's now been a lot of controversy about, whether copyrighted material can and should be used to train artificial intelligence models. And there are also people who say, well, if you've put that material out on the internet, then you maybe have you have foregone at least some of your intellectual property rights. Where do you fall in this AI large language model training controversy? And one of the reasons I'm asking that in this context, Jim, is that we're seeing a lot of that in Christian ministries. There, within, I've already mentioned the Bible translation world, but certainly not just in the Bible translation world. Artificial intelligence is being used commonly to produce new and quasi-original content. Where do you fall in all of this?
I'd say that the copyright, again, um, secures exclusive rights. It's exclusive ownership, the right to exclude anybody else from using that without permission and without compensating you for it if you desire. That's the bottom line, is it's not the AI makers' right to steal that information. That information belongs to somebody else and it's under protection, supposedly, of a copyright. And these AI large language models use the entire work. They don't scrape portions. It's not fair use. It is stealing the entire work.
Yeah, fair use, by the way, just for folks who are not maybe up on this, would be, for example, as a journalist, as a writer, if I wrote a review of your book, Jim, I could quote sections of your book, relatively. I mean, I can't quote whole chapters, but I could quote sentences, and in some cases, maybe even paragraphs of your book in a review or a critique or an assessment. That would be considered fair use. I mean, that's just one example of fair use. Do I
Yes,
have that right?
that is right. Yes. So, in my view, it's the discretion of the copyright owner whether or not to allow the use for AI training. That's their prerogative, the owner's prerogative to determine that, make that choice. And some will want to, some will do it for a price, some won't do it at all. And that's fine. Those are perfectly valid, legitimate decisions. But it is outright theft what is going on now in terms of the scraping entire works. And just because something's online if you scroll down to the bottom, you're likely to find a copyright uh, uh, disclaimer at the very bottom of the website. People
Yeah.
are giving it away. People are protecting it. They're saying, yeah, you can read this for free, but you can't go out and print 1,000 copies and sell them.
Yeah.
You sure
Well,
can't use it
Jim,
for the training your tool, your machine that's going to do some pretty significant amount of damage to the value of that intellectual property.
yeah. Well, I know here at Ministry Watch, we've already seen some of that. I mean, I have a number of Google alerts set for Ministry Watch and my name and some of my writers' names, so that if it, if something that we write shows up on some other publication, or some other website, I will know about it. And fairly frequently, I will get a Google alert, showing some of our work that has just been copied and literally copied and pasted onto somebody else's website. And it's been a little bit frustrating, in part because often I don't have much recourse. These are usually not, ethical actors who are, or who are going to be, much intimidated by the fact that I'm calling them and asking them not to do it. If they knew it was wrong when they did it, me pointing out that it was wrong is often doesn't have much of an impact. So, Jim, we got to land this airplane, so to speak. So, let me ask you a couple of sort of final questions. We, as we have alluded to and suggested in this conversation, um, there was a very strong link in the early days of the American Republic, linking private property ownership, linking in intellectual property, and also a clear understanding that these were biblical values. These emerged from a Judeo-Christian ethic. Fast forward 250 years, and that those ideas and that link are not as clear. Your book, of course, I think will provide a needed help in maybe making those links clear. But aside from writing this book and getting this book out in the world, if you were king of the world, Jim, what would you do? What would you tell our leaders, especially Christian leaders, that they should be doing, promoting, or advocating right now to help restore this link between creativity, private property ownership, and a biblical understanding of the way the world should operate?
Well, there are several bills. I won't go through the legislative litany, but just suffice it to say that the legislation is needed, not executive orders, not court rulings, actual black letter law, permanent law on the books that is protected against courts screwing them up, protected from the executive branch fiddling with those things, but that enable people to get secure property rights, intellectual property rights through patents and copyrights and trademarks, so forth and so forth, to be able to enforce their rights against anyone who would infringe them, to be able to obtain an injunction, for instance, against anybody who's infringing. And I mean, you look at the importance of it is the fact that China, for as the many ways in which it is a totalitarian socialist or communist rather nation, it also has been adopting a number of facets of our former, less weakened, stronger patent and copyright system. And now it's works out where it's not applied fairly and equally for, say, American countries versus companies versus European companies get this short straw when it comes to fairness. if you're up against a Chinese company in
So
the
legislation would be one way. Is there anything else?
to have the strong and secure um, economic rights, free market, get rid of regulation. Much of the regulation needs to be addressed that hinders individual economic freedom and corporate into economic freedom. There needs to be the ability for markets to work, for competition to develop. And the thing about it is innovation to develop as well through the economic freedom to be able to have and enjoy that exclusivity. And also there's a fetish right now in America around antitrust. I don't know why in the world people think antitrust is the be all and end all, but some people do think that. Antitrust is, it serves a purpose. I'm not saying get rid of our antitrust laws. I am saying pare them back to the point where intellectual property's exclusivity is recognized in terms of its creating dynamic competition. It's going to create a new market. It's going to be the only player in that market for some time, but not forever. And that's to make sure that we rein in antitrust so that the stomping on your ownership rights does not occur, and especially not fostered by the government to do that.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for writing this book. To Invent is Divine: Creativity and Ownership. I found the book to be fascinating, and one thing I want to make sure our readers understand is that you got a lot of stories in this book. I mean, we've talked. Um, Maybe it was a mistake in my strategy on this conversation, Jim, but because I wanted to kind of get at some of the big ideas, and we had a limited amount of time. But you just got lots and lots of really great stories of inventors and the way their inventions changed the world. So I found those stories to be interesting as well. But of course, those stories often were illustrative of some of these bigger ideas that we talked about today and are so important to our.
Let me just tick off a couple or a handful of those inventors. So you get
Sure.
Thomas Jefferson, the Wright brothers, Samuel Morse, a Christian artist as well as an inventor. You get the inventor of Gatorade. That's hard for me as a Georgia Bulldog to be proud of, but he's in there. You got uh, several inventors who you've never heard of but have changed your life, like the Qualcomm inventor who created the ability for us on our cell phones to connect with the internet wirelessly. I mean, you get all kinds of inventions, all kinds of inventors and creators across many types of creativity.
Yeah, well, they are fascinating stories, and I'm glad to, including, by the way, one of my favorites, and people don't realize this, and I'm glad you included her in the book, Hedy Lamarr, who many know her as a famous actress and sort of sex symbol of the 1940s and 50s, maybe I can't remember now exactly, but
Yeah.
she essentially invented or the frequency skipping that led to the internet. I mean, without her innovations, which she basically did as an amateur scientist, we wouldn't have maybe somebody else would have come along, but we wouldn't have had the internet today without that. So I was really gratified to see that
This
story.
this owes Hedy Lamarr.
Yeah,
Have it
exactly.
without her.
Exactly. It's great. So anyway, Jim, thanks so much for this book and for these great stories and for the time you spent with me today. I should say, in a spirit of full disclosure, that you and I have known each other for a long time, and fellow Georgia Bulldogs. So go Dogs, and I hope our trails cross again soon, Jim. Take care.
Thank you so much, Warren. Good to be with you.